Our guest today is none other than Rob Lawless, the man who has discovered the power of human connection. Find a friend for us, Rob.
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are layers to it, let's say. I almost see it as circles, like inner circle and then like outer circle, acquaintances, loose ties kind of thing. And I feel like I have many people in each of those circles. My closest, I would say, is friends and family. I'm the youngest of three siblings. I still have both of my parents, so as much as they're family, they're also friends who I spend a lot of time with. Then I went to Penn State University, and I have many good friends from there. I was a tour guide, and I was in a fraternity when I was there, so I'm very tight with people from both of those groups. And even though I graduated in 2013, 8 years ago, I still see and talk to these people on a daily, if not weekly basis, and they're a big part of my life. And then I in that also I have a few people from high school. And then outside of that, it's like the people that I knew in college, but maybe I'm not as in touch with as often. And then I have this whole project that I'm doing to spend an hour one on one with 10,000 different people. And some of those people have become friends. Some of them I've only seen and talked to once for that 1 hour. But in that situation, we're being friendly with each other for that hour and showing up to respect each other for that hour. And I kind of see those as relationships that maybe they only stay in that 1 hour. Maybe they pop back into my life 10 years down the road. Or maybe I get an Instagram message from them every once in a while of them checking in to see how I'm doing with the project. So I feel like there are very many levels to it, but to measure it, I guess, for people, I did talk to one person one time who said it takes 90 hours with someone to really feel like you're a friend of theirs and to really get to know them. And I think about that more often now. I think, okay, who have I spent 90 hours with? And I think those people in that close circle, I've spent way more than that. And for everyone else, every time we have a touch point, we're working towards that point. So that was a very long winded answer, but that's kind of how I view friendship.
I think it gives me a very, and everyone who will be listening, I think that's such a good definition. So, what I picked from you is that the people that you consider as friends are people that you have continuing contact with and people that you've spent time with them. So, to you, do you think proximity plays a big role in friendship?
I definitely think it does. And just going off of my college experience, where a lot of these friendships were formed because we're on the same campus. It's so easy for us to say, hey, what are you doing tonight? Do you want to come over to my apartment and hang out? And then you graduate and you start to see some of those people that you would see very often in close proximity. Maybe you only see them once a year, or you start to only talk once a year, or a couple times every other month or so. And it doesn't mean you're not friends, because a lot of those people you click right back into place whenever you're with them. But proximity makes it so much easier to have more touch points with people. And another way I think about friendship is having some type of foundation plus frequency of interaction. So if you have a foundation, for example, us doing this podcast is a foundation for wherever our friendship will go in the future. If you and I were to meet every month after this and have 2 hour conversations, we'd probably get to really deep levels of connection. So it's that frequency of interaction that builds on top of the foundation. And I think when you're in close proximity to someone, it allows that to happen a lot easier. That being said, I don't think that someone being on the other side of the country or other side of the world will limit. It doesn't necessarily mean you can't keep in touch with them in a deep way. One of my best friends lives in Los Angeles. I currently live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've had the opportunity to go out and live with him several times, and we still talk on a daily, if not weekly basis. So even though he's a country's length away from me pretty much, we're still very tight. So I think as you get older too, you find which ones can stand the test of that proximity, and then the others that kind of fall into that category of keeping in touch every other month or so.
Friendships change with time and with seasons in your life, it seems.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And with keeping with friends, when someone asks me who Rob is, to me, I consider you as this guy who's very intentional about friends or friendship. You make effort, like your project, where you make time to meet up with people regularly, and you've been consistent for years. Tell us about your project, how it started, and what inspired it.
I am on a mission to spend 1 hour one on one with 10,000 different people. I started this project back in November of 2015, so coming up on 6 years. It's been a
Wow, that is
yeah, long
excellent.
time, but I have now met over 4,500 people, so I'm still not even halfway there. And yeah, I think it'll probably take
That's
probably 10
amazing.
more years to complete, but as I mentioned, when I was in university, I was a tour guide, I was in a fraternity. I also used to do Habitat for Humanity trips over spring breaks, and I was part of this philanthropy effort called the Penn State Dance Marathon. We raised money for the fight against pediatric cancer. And also, I was part of a homecoming effort. This my shirt says alumni relations. This is from my homecoming time, and I had all these different groups of friends on this campus of 40,000 students. And because I got to know the people around me, it made that place feel a lot more like a home to me. Like I would go back to my parents' place in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but whenever I would go back to school to start a new semester or something like that, I felt like I was going home to a place that was really important to me. And it was that way because of the connections I had made there. As a student, I studied finance and then I minored in accounting and entrepreneurship. So after school, I went into doing consulting for Deloitte, and I went from this environment that felt like a home where I was very familiar with the people around me to this cubicle where I was formatting PowerPoint slides and Excel sheets, and it didn't really feel like people cared about who I was as long as I got my work done. And that for me was a really difficult transition. And having minored in entrepreneurship, I always thought to myself, okay, I don't plan to work in an office until I'm 65 with my 2 weeks vacation every year and then retire and then enjoy my life. For some people, that's the right path for their risk profile. For me, it just was not. So I always wanted to start my own thing, whether it was an app or a company or something. And as I realized more and more how I missed that sense of community, I wanted to get back to it. And then with the advent of Instagram and social media, I thought, okay, I'm going to go on this journey to meet 10,000 different people, and I'm just going to document it, and I'll write about what I learned from these people. And if people think it's interesting, which I think is an interesting concept, maybe eventually I can loop in like brands who have similar values to me, and they can help me push this project forward to the end, because I think it's a cool thing for people to see someone complete such a daunting mission, one that involves connection, which even before COVID was going away, right? We had technology and social media kind of distorting our view of connection with each other. Then you throw this whole pandemic in and the isolation that comes with it. So this idea of communicating with other people or spending time with them, it's almost become a novelty. And I think people enjoy paying attention to that. So I was like, okay, how do I make this into my career? And it's been 6 years figuring that out. And I'm currently finding a way to sustain myself through speaking engagements, both talking to universities and talking to corporations. And I'm in a good place now. I feel really confident about the future. But that's what I have been up to for the last 6 years. That's kind of my project. I keep track of it on Instagram. It's called Rob's 10K Friends. And for every person I meet, I post a picture with them and I post a bit about what I learned from their story. I met about 3,200 people in person. Then the pandemic happened. I switched to virtual. I've met like 1,300 people virtually since then. So that's the gist of it.
Okay. And you're saying you've learned different things from all these people you meet. They are all from different backgrounds, be it culturally, be it the, the work they do, be it countries that they are from. What are the common themes that you've seen when it comes to these relationships that you've formed?
I think the details of everyone's life can be different, but the themes in this is a bit about what I speak about now is everyone has a family dynamic. right? Parents that influence them, they may have siblings or extended family that influence them. Everyone has a family dynamic or a support system, and then they all have an occupation, whether that's their education or their job, and that's a big way of how we all spend our time. We all have to find a way to pay the bills somehow. And depending on how old we are, it might be you're in class all the time, or it might be you're in that cubicle. Outside of that occupation, we all have hobbies that we enjoy doing, which is our recreational
Mhm.
activities, whether it's yoga or going to the gym or watching a TV series, going to concerts, whatever. And we all have dreams of where we want to take our life in the future. So the acronym for this, it's FORD. It stands for Family, Occupation, Recreation, Dreams. And FORD, yeah.
Forward. I
Yeah,
like
and I
that. Yeah,
I
I
have
love that.
talked to people at this point from probably 85 different countries, and it doesn't matter if we grew up with different religions, or if our country was super conservative or super liberal, or if our parents were divorced or together. All of our lives can be boiled down to these four themes, and we can really get to know each other by asking questions within these categories. And I think that's a really cool thing, because I think there's this misconception that our lives are so different from each other, that if we grew up on different sides of the ocean from each other, that it's so different. But when I talk to people, it's very similar. Like if I'm talking to someone from India or Brazil or Latvia, it's the same kind of conversation that I'm having with someone from the United States. We're still covering everything within those
Mhm.
categories. So I think life is a lot more chill than people think from an overall theme. And then of course when you get into the details, there are people who've been through traumatic experiences, people who've had really exciting things happen. But those are the details, right? It's not so much the general themes. So that's kind of what I've learned through interacting with so many different people.
Okay. And going back to the theme of friendship and acquaintances, how does that differ? Some people would think maybe the time they spend together defines what an acquaintance is versus a friend, or how long they've known the person. For you, what differentiates the two? Because you said you have friends,
Mm.
acquaintances, and of course all the other relationships that you have.
I do think time is a big factor in that, and the time that has allowed you to reach deeper levels of connection, like really understanding your friend's family dynamic and how they grew up and why they are the way that they are, and really understanding their goals in life and how you can help them achieve them, or checking in to make sure their mental health is okay, things like that. You, I guess with friends, you're really making an investment of yourself in who they are as a person, where as an acquaintance, you may be aware of some of these things, but you're not really going out of your way at 3 a.m. On a Monday morning when their car broke down. I mean, if they called you, yeah,
Mhm.
obviously, hopefully you would consider going to help them. But you know, there are these levels of
Yeah.
friendship where if your friend is struggling, you know you will fly to wherever they are to help them. And acquaintances, sometimes
Mhm.
you're not even the person they go to for that, and they're not the person you go to for that. And I think it is partially the time you spend with them, and then partially your personality. If you click, a lot of my best friends, we have similar ambitions towards life. We kind of have similar family dynamics that have allowed us to really understand each other, and we have similar goals for where we want to go in the future, of having like a house, wife, kids, etc., and doing really well in our careers. Because we're in alignment with that stuff, it allows us to really become closer with each other. Whereas acquaintances might be someone that I think their career path is really interesting, but it's not necessarily one that I want for myself. So maybe I'm not trying
Yeah.
to succeed in the same way that they are in life. So yeah, I think time
Mhm.
and personality are probably two big factors.
And I admire your consistency even through the pandemic. You know, we've suffered a great loss as a humanity, and we've lost lives. We've lost the time that we're spending with our families, with our friends. But you've been very intentional about keeping these relationships. And in my profession, we know that friendships are known to improve your quality of life, even with the health outcomes. We've seen that people who have support and all that do much better than people who are lonely or people who do not have close relationships. For you, what would you like to teach the world with your project and with your experience? With when it comes to intentionality, you are very intentional. That's what I see in your project, and I admire that.
Yes, I think the first point is to be intentional about connection. I spoke at Pepperdine University yesterday virtually, and I was talking with some of the people who helped me set up the gig, and I was telling them it blows my mind that people are not more intentional about connection. I have
Hmm.
my project and I'm able to meet people that way. You have your podcast, so you also are intentional about connection. And probably you and I have learned similar things where I think about it. I did a TEDx talk back in April and I kind of defined a few things, the value of human connection. And I think it's a sense of
Hmm.
belonging. When you meet with people, I've met with people in Philadelphia back when I was doing things in person, and then I would run into them on the streets of Philadelphia. And just having a familiar face to see when you're out and about and you're not expecting to see them, it's always going to make you feel more connected to that specific area. And not only did it happen there, I ran into people in Los Angeles that I had met in Philadelphia. I went up to Seattle one time and was at this random brewery and ran into a guy that I had met in Philadelphia. So in LA, I was feeling like I was at
Great.
home. And in Seattle, I was feeling like I was at home. Because I think home is probably more defined by the relationships we have with people than the geographic area. And if you go back to my
Hmm.
time at Penn State, once all of my friends started to graduate, like if I go back there now, yeah, it's nostalgic, but the faces that I see on campus are not the faces I recognized when I was there. So it kind of lost a little bit of that sense. So the sense of belonging, I think, is really big. The perspective. I've met people who have lost both of their parents by the time they're in their early 20s and they're only children, so they no longer
Hmm.
have any immediate family. And as someone who's 30 years old who still has both my siblings and both my parents, I can't comprehend being 20 years old and no longer having that immediate support system that's built in since birth. Or
Hmm.
I've talked to people who've introduced me to new musical artists, and then I find myself listening to that artist for the next few weeks, or that I
Hmm.
find some other artist related to that one. And the last thing is the opening of doors for the future. I've met people who I've then come back in contact with who've made introductions to me that have led to press pieces, that have led to partnerships. So all of this comes from being intentional about connection, right? If you open yourself up to spending time with someone and getting to know them, at the very least, you'll have an increased sense of belonging. And maybe at the most, you're changing your life in a way that a door opens you never could have imagined. And I think it starts with being intentional. Like for me, I have the goal to meet 10,000 people. I don't know why people don't have a New Year's resolution of, hey, I'm going to try to meet one new person outside of my circle, one person a month this
Hmm.
year. If they would do that, I think they would become more comfortable with conversation. They would start to see these benefits play out in their own lives.
And being intentional and being passionate about friends is a beautiful thing. Some people will say, "That's not me. I was not born like that." For you, would you say it's something that was natural for you, or you something happened in your life and you said, "You know what? I'm going for this thing, and I'm intentional about it, and I will give it my
I
best."
have always loved meeting new people. And I think for me, the situation was up until the end of college, there were so many opportunities to organically meet new people. In high school, you just meet your other classmates on the soccer team, you're making friends, whatever. In college, whatever clubs you join, you're in the class next to someone. And then when you graduate, it felt to me like those organic opportunities were taken away. That everyone thought their friend group was established and no one wanted to create new connections. People always had to have some type of agenda, whether it was dating or networking, attached to the idea of spending time with someone. And I didn't like that. So I wanted to create a way to get around that, which for me was the project. But I've always been interested in other people, and then I became more intentional about it once the ability to meet people organically went away. And I will say, from my time of doing this project, I've become a much better conversationalist with people, because even if I can't relate to you or your specific story through my own life, at this point I've talked to other people who've informed the way I see the world, and I can relate to you through their
Hmm.
story or whoever I'm talking to. And I think that's really cool too. The ability to relate to each other, I think, is an undervalued skill, but one that you really build when you open yourself up to having more conversations.
Wow. I am just amazed because, we live in a world where sometimes we can be so divided by politics and all that, but friendships, to me, it seems it transcends all those you've mentioned, backgrounds in terms of be it race, be it culture, be it country, and all that. So, so for our society, what I'm getting from you is let's be intentional with with making connections and connecting with people. But what if someone has intentions that are not so good
Mm,
when you're trying to make connection with them? How do you pick that up and how do you deal with that?
that's a great question. I've always said I think our souls have lie detectors for authenticity. I think,
Okay, I like
yeah.
that.
So
That is
I
wonderful.
feel like there's maybe it's just intuition at that point of if you're feeling someone is not being authentic, to try to feel that out, or if they have bad intentions, and maybe step away from that situation, um, and put your intentionality into a different connection. It's always great to give someone a chance and an opportunity to prove themselves wrong, but also to follow your gut in those types of situations. So I think that's one way of feeling it out, I guess. And then obviously, if someone does do something wrong, don't be afraid to leave that situation. I think sometimes we have to stand up for ourselves and not be afraid to walk away from things. I think there's a lot of power in the ability to say no or the ability to walk away from situations. And the other thing is be the person who has good intentions. If you're someone who's like, oh, okay, I have bad intentions and now I have this framework, I'm going to go out and meet people. Don't do
Mhm.
that. Don't be someone with bad intentions. And
Yeah.
if you do that, people will figure that out. And I don't think I ever would have gotten to over 4,500 people if I had bad intentions ever with my project, because then I wouldn't have gotten the introductions that people made for me. I think even in the beginning, one of the first guys I met, because I was just reaching out to people saying, hey, I have this idea to meet 10,000 people. Do you want to be one of the first 10? And I know one of the guys, I think he was the sixth or eighth person that I met. He thought that I was a multi-level marketing person trying to sit him down to pitch him my business scheme. And then we left, and he was like, this dude had nothing for me other than he just wanted to sit and get to know me. And he made introductions to
Mhm.
me for other friends. And since then, he's had me on his podcast. And it's just because he was able to see that I was coming in with no intentions. And I think for a lot of the interactions I've had, that's why people have been willing to help me in my project. If you're the other way around, no one's going to be willing to help you.
And good intentions and addressing the authenticity is very important. But we've seen in close friends that you've known for a long time that some friends fail because we do not know how to handle conflict. How do you deal with conflict when that arises in relationships and friendships that you have?
Communication. I think communication is the biggest piece. When I was a student at Penn State, my sophomore, junior, and senior year, I lived with the same guy all 3 years. And then my senior year, there was another
Hmm.
guy who came in to live with us. So my friends TJ and Greg. Greg I lived with for 3 years. TJ came in senior year. And we all butted heads for that first semester of senior year, where TJ felt like Greg and I were already very close and he was the outcast. And then there were times when I felt like TJ was being a certain way. And before we knew how to communicate with each other, we would just let things build up into arguments. And then we would kind of like not talk to each other or whatever. And then somehow, I don't know how we did it, but we just got to a place where instead of letting things build up, even if a conversation made us anxious or we knew it was going to be awkward, we got really good at throwing it out right in the early stages. And all three of us are so tight now because of that. When I talk to my friend TJ now, he's the one I lived with in Los Angeles for a year and a half. It's such a refreshing type of relationship because we know we won't let things build up and we know we're not afraid to have awkward conversations with each other, even if we're nervous at the time, like, hey, the way
Mm.
you're doing this thing is bothering me, or this upcoming situation that we're planning for, the way you're doing it is not the way that I agree with. By having those conversations
Yeah.
very early on, you just diffuse the whole situation. And I think that goes with anything, whether it's talking with your family members, talking with your girlfriend, whatever. If communication, I think, is the biggest thing, because if you don't communicate, you're not working with the reality of the situation. You're going off of perceptions and what you think someone may be feeling or doing, when that could be completely different than what's going on in their mind.
Hmm. Wow, that's amazing. So conflict does happen. We cannot avoid it, but we should learn to handle that uh, by communicating clearly. That's what I'm getting from this. And with all these friends that you've had, I want to talk about your close friends. Have you had friendships that you've had to let go? You're saying, I've known you so long, but I don't think this is working. Or you've been able to keep all your friendships that you've had, that you've valued up to
I feel
now.
like I've never had to cut someone off because things haven't been working. I
That is
Yes, and
great.
I also think that that is maybe partially the result of who I've been able to surround myself with throughout my life. I there's that question people always ask, what's your greatest achievement in life? And I think a lot of times people think about like this work reward they got or this event they put on or whatever. For me, I think my greatest achievement is the people I've been able to surround myself with and become friends with. And I've just been fortunate enough to have people who haven't needed cutting off. The people I surround myself with are people who inspire me and encourage me to be a better person. So I don't want to cut those people off. I want to let them into my life. Further, there are people in high school. I only have a couple of good friends from high school. I mean, many of the people that I was with in high school, I'm not really tight with anymore, but we're kind of you are in a limited pool of people at that point, right? You're not so much choosing who your people are the same way that you do in university or afterwards. But even if I saw any of those people today, I'd be happy to see them. I've never been one to burn bridges. I've always enjoyed having good relationships with people. So yeah, I think I'm lucky to not be in that situation. So I don't know if I can offer much advice in the way of cutting people off and moving on from that. But I guess my initial advice would
Hmm.
be try to be the person that surrounds yourself with good people and make sure that you're not being someone who other people want to cut off.
From our conversations here, one of the things that kept on coming from our conversations was loyalty. How do you define loyalty?
I think loyalty is a willingness to be there for someone in their time of need, and maybe a willingness to help someone even when they may not realize that they need help. I think it goes back to that investment in them, like being willing to invest your time and your emotions into someone else, and
Hmm.
hopefully having that in return from them. I do think it should be a really good balance, but yes, showing up. I think for me, the way that I think about it, because I value friendship over a lot of different things, and it's like if I have a friend who's going to fly into Philadelphia and they're only here for a day and they ask me if I want to meet up, am I going to go spend time with that person? I think loyalty is going to spend time with that person because realizing one, that our time with each other is limited. So when we have the opportunities to do
Mhm.
this, to take advantage of it. And two, it's just a really good way to spend your time. Like if you could be home watching TV or you could go in and see someone you haven't seen in a while, choosing to go
Mhm.
spend that time with that person. I think that's also a sense of loyalty.
Okay. Wow. I love that definition because I have not heard it that way. And it just brings a different perspective. So if someone would say, with your life and pursuing friendships and being intentional about them, have you been able to persuade some people who are not intentional, who do not value friendships, be it people in the family or be it people who are close to you? Have you been able to influence them to take relationships seriously?
I hope so. I I know my brother, my older brother, he's 2 years older than I am, has talked about seeing relationships different with people, or even he lives in New York City, so being more aware of people when he's on the subway and wanting to be more open to connecting with them. And then I've seen throughout my project, there are a couple of cousins in Toronto that I met, and each of them during quarantine set a goal for themselves to meet 100 new people, and each of them were able to achieve that goal, which is really cool. And there was a guy in Germany who tried to meet 30 people in 30 weeks, inspired by my project. And there's a guy in India right now who wants to meet 1,000 new people. And after we met, he started on this journey and he's already met over 50 people. So maybe they're not people who were against being intentional about connection, but they were in one way or another inspired by my project to go out and be this way in their life. And
Yes.
I hope that that continues, and I hope that there are situations that I'm not aware of where people see my joy of connecting with other people and they think, oh, maybe this is something that I could add into my own life. Because I'm not really big on trying to inspire people. Like, I meet people that are like, I want to touch a million lives or I want to inspire a million lives before I die. For me, it doesn't really matter. I'm like, I just want to live my life
Mhm.
in a way that is a positive example for other people, and whether they take that example and run with it or not is kind of up to them, but I want it to at least be there for them to see, to make that decision.
And just before we end, most of us complain about time. Say, I do not have time to invest in friendships. I do not have time for this. I'll just keep my one friend. So, does the number of friends that you have influence the quality of friendships, or is it important at all? Or you can just have as many as you have and spend as much time with them and still be able to do everything that you need to do in life?
I do think time plays a, a role, because I'm not as close with all 4,500 people that I've met as I am with my friends from college. And my friends from college, we've been having these, remember, that foundation and these touch points for the last 10, 12
Hmm.
years. So we've been able to build that up. I think there are people from my project, if I met them back then, I could be just as close with them, but because of time, instead they just become someone who's part of my project that I keep in touch with and go to their event every once in a while and grow a relationship with, but maybe not as close as that inner circle. But time, I do think, plays a role. I think you can have multiple good friendships, and I think that's important because then you can also have multiple perspectives on life and be exposed to multiple different things. I think another thing when it comes to time is maybe, instead of saying I don't have time, own up to the fact that this is not a priority for me, right? There's always like, you could
Yeah.
sleep 1 hour less, or you could be off of TikTok for less than a certain amount of time each day. So think about what are your priorities. And I think it comes down to really seeing the value in things. If people see the value in connecting with other people, they will prioritize it. If they don't, they might not. And I think that's part of why I enjoy doing what I do, is hopefully exposing people to that value and being like, hey, this is a better way, it's better for your happiness, it's better for your health, it's better for your future than you scrolling through. Maybe, I mean, you might learn something really cool from TikTok that could change your life too. So I can't actually really say that it's every time going to be more valuable, but I do think it's a really important piece to have in our lives, like in our portfolio of how we spend our time. That human connection should be there.
Hmm. I love it. I love it. So, what I've learned from our conversation is the importance of being intentional. So, you value friendships and you are intentional about keeping that. Also, be authentic and know how to stand up for yourself and resolve conflict in a healthy way and go on living your best life. Give time, give parts of you as well. What are the last words that would like us you would like to leave with us before you tell us about because I also want people to
Mm.
go following you. I know you are on Instagram, you are on Facebook, you are on Twitter. What are the last words that when people think about you, just you would like them to remember?
I would say treat human connection as an experience rather than a transaction. Because if you go into it viewing it as an experience, whether you have great chemistry with that person or not, it's still valuable to you. If you have great chemistry, that's awesome. Maybe you continue that conversation and you had fun talking with them. If you didn't have good chemistry and it was really hard to connect with them and pull things out of them, if you're seeing that as an experience, well, now you know how to interact with that personality the next time you come in contact with it. And because you were just there to experience it, you still learned something in a way. You still had an experience. If you go in thinking, what can I get out of this? Then you'll be disappointed if you feel like the reality did not match up to your expectations. So I think by treating each other and human connection as an experience, we open ourselves up more to the gifts that come with it. And I think that's a really important way to approach connection.
Experience, not
Yes.
transaction. I will keep that. I love it. Thank you,
Yes, of
Rob.
course.